Good afternoon, everybody. We are going to get started here as we have a full presentation today. My name is Holly, and I'm the Community Engagement Coordinator for Lumina Hospice and Palliative Care. Welcome to our Illuminating series. This is a monthly seminar that takes place the third Tuesday of every month. We have various topics on healthy aging, advanced care planning, and other end-of-life topics. Today we'll be hearing about funeral trends of the past, present, and future. And for today's presentation, if you can put any questions, comments, reactions that you have in the chat box, and then if we have time at the end, we will come back to questions. And before we do that, I just want to see who we have with us today. So launching a poll question for everyone. If you can just choose which option best describes you as to why you're attending today. And while we finish the poll here, I'll just give a little background about our presenter today. Deborah Threadgill owns Threadgill Memorial Services, which is located in Beaverton here in Oregon, with her husband, Ron. And they have been in business for 15 years. And today they're going to talk to us about some of, or Deborah's going to talk to us about some of the unique cremation and memorial services that they offer. Deborah has a degree in sociology and has had quite an interesting career path. She was in hospice billing. She was a probation officer, a counselor in a group home, a retail store manager of a chocolate shop, a teacher in a private school, and has also worked with homeowners in preparing their homes for sale. But she says her most important role has been a mother. So we're excited to hear what she does today. All right, I'm going to end this poll here. Okay, thanks everybody for doing that. We have a lot of interested individuals here today, and also a good chunk of our audience's hospice staff and volunteers. Okay, so now I'm going to try to turn it over to Deborah here. I will, there we go.
Okay. I'll pull up my.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity, and thank you, hospice workers, for what you do. We love hospice. We think it's a great partnership between a hospice and a funeral home. Hopefully what we do is you pass the baton to us, and the kind of care that you've been taking with your families, we like to consider that kind of a continuity of care. So anyway, as Holly said, so we've actually, my husband and I have been in the funeral industry since 1999. We started with another couple in a funeral home, and but we established our own Threadgill's Memorial in 2007. So we offer both conventional and unconventional, and you'll see there, we like to say we own the only Harley-Davidson motorcycle hearse in the Pacific Northwest. And then we call her Harley D. And we had a photo shoot last year. So this is at the St. John's Bridge, and you'll see it throughout.
We can't see the, try sharing your screen again, Deborah. We can't see it.
Okay, that's what I was wondering. Okay, let's just see here. All right. Hold on. Okay, let me come back here to share screen. Share.
There we go.
Okay. Okay, can we see it?
Yep, there we go.
Great. I'm going to kind of slide this out of here so that you see it. Okay, so that's Harley D. So our topic is a new look at death. We love to use our Harley-Davidson hearse to talk about death. So here we are, we were able to get dressed up for Day of the Dead. And let's begin. So my goal is to give you a brief history of the funeral industry, or how did we get where we are today, discuss some options and some misconceptions, introduce trends, and then answer questions if you use the chat box. So let us begin. So in terms of history, prior to the Civil War, we were in an agricultural community. So families had the task of caring for their dead. The family, they prepared and dressed the body. The local cabinet maker would make the coffin. And then the loved one was placed in the parlor for a viewing. And so that's where we get the name funeral parlor. And then after the viewing, the coffin was then taken to the church for a service and then laid to rest in the church cemetery. So this is what we did in the beginning of this country. Now, with the American Civil War, the soldiers that were killed in battle were loaded onto trains and they were transported back to their homes for burial in this family plot. However, the smell was so terrible going through the towns that something had to be done. So bodies then were embalmed in order to transport long distances without the smell. So this picture is a Civil War embalming tent. Now, a critical point in terms of making embalming popular and actually legitimizing it is after Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, and then his body was taken in a train cross country. They stopped at various places from Washington, D.C. to Springfield, Illinois. So his body was embalmed. Actually, it had to be embalmed several times due to the length of the journey. So as embalming became more popular, the embalmer became a businessman, and he moved caring for the dead out of the family home into a funeral parlor. And this was the beginning of others taking care of your loved one. Death care was taken out of the hands of the family and turned over to quote unquote professionals. And then starting in the 1950s, corporations started acquiring family-owned funeral homes and emphasized this idea of death professionals, that you had to be trained. So there's really only a handful of us, at least in the Portland area, there's just a handful of us that are family owned and operated or independently owned. And whenever I use or have to use another funeral home in another area, when I call, one of the first things I ask is, are you independently owned? Because there's a real value in terms of having a funeral home that's independently owned. So. All right, so, and this quote comes from a book called Confessions of a Funeral Director. I'm going to intersperse some books throughout this presentation. And then I told Holly that I'll make available a PDF of this presentation, because I think there's lots of information that I really want to share with you. So this idea with doctors having authority over dying and funeral directors gaining authority over death, it created a culture of death virgins, people who have little experience and know-how when it comes to the end stage of life. And so as a result, and you have witnessed this, the topic of death becomes taboo. People feel like if they don't talk about it, it's not going to happen. And I think it's sad in terms of hospice, because there's so much time lost in terms of saying goodbye because people are in denial. So the idea is, what can we do to make death cool in order to start talking about it? Anyway, so there's a few things. Ask a mortician. Maybe some of you have heard of Caitlin Doty. She's written several books. And she also has a YouTube channel called Ask a Mortician. And she's really been spearheading this whole idea of talking about death, making it a positive situation. She likes to call it the Order of the Good Death, whose members promote positive approaches to mortality. So that's one way. Death cafes. So, and we've done death cafes here in the Portland Beaverton area. And what I can tell you is there's a lot of hospice workers that attend this. Unfortunately, with family and friends, anyone who is interested in death or wants to talk about it is either morbid or sick or both. So sometimes hospice workers, they want to share, and the same thing with funeral directors, but there's really no one that wants to listen because no one wants to talk about death. So death cafes are a great way for people to come together. They serve coffee and cake and have conversation. So, all right, so the times, they are a-changing. So burial versus cremation. Years ago, it was predominantly burial. However, cremation has now surpassed burials. So it was thought that flame cremation was a greener alternative to burial. But because of the carbon and toxins released in the air during cremation, it is not the greenest disposition. Actually, it's a grayer option. So what to do? I like to say, call an Aquaman to introduce aqua cremation. Well, what is aqua cremation? It's a flameless process that uses water instead of fire. It's considered eco-friendly. It's also known as alkaline hydrolysis or dissolution. So on death certificates, anyone who uses aqua cremation, it's actually considered dissolution. And the legislation came out, Oregon legislation, this few months ago, actually making aqua cremation considered dissolution because the body is dissolved. So I see, Holly, if there's people that have questions, feel free to stop me if they have questions about what I'm talking about. I don't mind being interrupted.
Okay.
All right. So, so aqua cremation, first of all, there's no emissions of harmful greenhouse gases or mercury. It's really 1/10 the carbon footprint as opposed to flame cremation. It's over 90% energy savings when compared to flame cremation. And it's a gentle and respectful process. There's a lot of people that they go for the eco-friendly aspect of it, but there's a lot of spouses, especially wives, that really kind of cringe at the fact that their husband is going to be flamed, fire. And so for them, this aqua cremation is a gentler process. So it's like comparing a Prius to a diesel truck in terms of the environmental. However, there is one advantage to flame cremation, and I designed a t-shirt many years ago to enable people to talk about death and cremation. It does give you your last best chance at a smoking hot body. All right, any questions regarding aqua cremation before we go on to some other things?
I don't see any questions specifically about that yet.
Okay.
Oh, here's one question about cost. Yes. And this might come up for other ones too. You know, what is right. It more expensive than cremation to do aqua cremation? It is, and let me explain to you what's happened in Portland. A company called First Call Mortuary Services purchased the alkaline hydrolysis machine about 4 or 5 years ago. And we were going full steam ahead with aqua cremation. We were promoting it.
And then he was bought by a corporation called Foundation Partners. And for whatever reason, they decided to pack up our aqua cremation machine and ship it to Las Vegas. So those of us who promoted aqua cremation, alcohol hydrolysis in Portland no longer have access to that. We actually have to go up to Kent, Washington, which is the nearest alkaline hydrolysis machine. Now, there is another company, another funeral home in Roseburg that has a aqua cremation or alkaline hydrolysis, but his is a slower unit. The one that First Call Mortuary Services had was a kind of a high pressure, so it allowed for a quicker time for the aqua cremation to take place. So our choices now are limited. We're hoping that someone in the Portland area deems it necessary. But the aqua cremation machine in Portland was actually subcontracted to other funeral homes. So it really just depended. Our charges was just $500 more than what we charged for flame cremation. So,
Okay. And you might be getting to some of these other questions as you go along, but there's questions about the process of aqua cremation, how long it takes.
Yeah. So, and that's a good question. So it could typically take, depending on the size of the individual, from 5 to 6 to 7 hours from start to finish, because the water has to be warmed. The person is put into a cage and then inserted into this large machine, and the water and the alkali are introduced, and then the water is warmed, and then it's like a your ultimate jacuzzi. And so it takes about 4 to 7 hours for that process to be completely finished. The skeletal remains, so you have skeletal remains just like you would in a traditional flame. Those are actually taken and they have to be placed in an oven to dry out the bones, and then they're processed the same way as traditional flame. And so you still get cremated remains, but it's more of a powdery consistency as opposed to like the gritty sand of traditional flame. Okay, so I'm going to introduce you to the question is ashes or stones, the whole option of solidified remains. So what happens is that there's a company called Parting Stone out of New Mexico that takes cremated remains, and the process is on the side here. They actually filter it to make sure there's nothing, any metal or anything in it, staple screws. And then they introduce like a polymer, and they use this process to actually create these stones, and they put them in a form, well, they call stone forming. And then they're allowed to solidify by just like a pottery in a kiln. They're fired, and then they're polished, and then they're returned to the family. And so for each adult cremated remains, you can get about 30 stones. And so the whole idea is that it allows you to feel close and connected to your loved one. Sometimes people want to place stones in different places. So with traditional flame, people like to maybe take a small portion and scatter it, at some favorite places, either vacation spots or, whatever was meaningful to that person. Well, you can do this with these stones as well, or each family member or friend can actually have one. You can actually create an altar with these stones. So we have a family that wanted to scatter cremated remains at a golf course, which you are not allowed to scatter cremated remains on private land, which is what a golf course, but you could take a stone and place it someplace and no one would even know. So that's a new trend called parting stone.
Deborah, we had a question. If the stone, does anything ever happen to the stones? Say they were left outside, you know, to the elements, would they decompose or dissolve or?
No, apparently they are fired so that it's hard enough that they don't decompose. It's just like a rock, and you can place it anywhere. So the website is called Parting Stone. You can actually go there and learn more about it in terms of, and the thing is, you can take cremated remains that you've had for years and use this company. Just a matter of shipping the cremated remains to them. So, because what we know is a lot of people just they don't know what to do with cremated remains. You know, they want cremation, but then they don't know what to do with the remains, and so they keep them either in a closet or their garage, and then they kind of feel guilty or bad. And so anyway, so this is a way that you can have it be a little more intimate for you. All right. Okay, so the next one is family-directed home funerals. I particularly am like this process. Just like home births, baby boomers want to circumvent funeral homes because they're way too expensive. And so I got my training down in California called Final Passages. That's where some of these pictures are from. So this whole idea of, you know, back prior to the Civil War, where families then took care of their loved one. With family-directed home funerals, the caring for the deceased is returned to the family. And then family and friends and community can have an opportunity to say goodbye in a home setting, and it's not dictated by the schedule of a funeral home. The nice thing about home funerals are they're really an authentic and it's a healing after death experience in a safe and familiar place. The thing is that it's an education, because not everyone is going to want a home funeral, because not everyone wants to have their loved one stay in their home. But for those who want it, and again, it's really an education thing. It's really a beautiful situation for people. Now, what I want to tell you is that home funerals are absolutely legal. Basically, what you want to do is change the clothing and bathe the body after death. And this, again, just removes any bacteria. You want to keep the body cool by using dry ice under the torso and head. And then some people want to do it from beginning to end. You know, they want to be able to do the death certificate. They want to be able to transport their loved one to the crematory or to the cemetery. But you can have, can be like a menu. So if you find a home funeral friendly funeral home to help with the legal paperwork and transportation if necessary. So on the side here, it's the National Home Funeral Alliance. You can go to their website and you can find funeral homes that are home funeral friendly. Again, it was appealing to me. We do things so differently than your traditional funeral home because we advocate for the family. And so it's important that hospices know that this is legal. I had someone call a couple months ago, and they were panicked because they thought that they could carry out, and they told the hospice that they were going to have this home funeral, and then they were going to transport their loved one up to Recompose in Seattle. And I got this frantic phone call from some end-of-life doulas here in Portland, and saying, can you please talk to this wife? And she said to me, the hospice said they're going to call the medical director, the coroner, and the police, and they were going to come and make sure that my husband is transported by a funeral home. So this was very, very stressful for her. So again, I just want to make it clear that home funerals are absolutely legal. If you have any questions throughout this whole presentation, my contact information is at the end. Feel free to ask questions if I don't answer them all here. All right. So we're looking at now ecological death care. So what is a green or natural burial? So it's really like this spectrum. A truly green or natural burial, the names can be interchanged. It uses methods and materials that don't have an impact on the environment. So in other words, everything is biodegradable. And so the body is not embalmed. It's buried directly into the earth. It's either in a biodegradable container. There's no concrete vault or grave liner. A lot of times the plots are often unmarked or marked with a simple stone. And then the grounds or graves are planted with only native species, and they're not chemically or mechanically, land and water. So that's your green or natural burial. This is kind of more of a picture of what a standard burial that has to be at least 5 feet down. And then your natural burial. You can either use a shroud or a wicker, anything that's biodegradable. So the question is, can natural burial? So this we've done several. One in a cemetery, and basically what the family does is they lay like fir boughs on the bottom of the grave, and then they lower the person in there with a lowering board. We've also done on private property. You have to have a fairly large piece of property. Wouldn't necessarily advise it in like a subdivision. Up here, Mount Calvary Catholic Church has a natural burial section where people can bury their loved one. And then Willamette National Cemetery actually has case by case. You can actually have a natural burial at Willamette National Cemetery. You just when a funeral home calls, I just need to say that that's what the family wants, and it's in a special section in Willamette National. And then Riverview Cemetery in Portland is a real advocate for natural burial. And then again, they use native plants. They have a whole section that's not that doesn't use a lawnmower and things like that. So can you bury on private property? That's what we're asked. And so yes, you can bury on private property, but first of all, you have to get a letter of approval from the county planning or zoning department. If you sell your property, you have to disclose that there's a person buried there, and you must be prepared that the buyers will request that you remove or what's called disinter the body. Now, oh, you know what? All right, I thought I had a slide here. So my friend Elizabeth Fournier owns Cornerstone Funeral Home in Boring. She's actually written a book on green burials, and I went to visit her last month, and she actually does a lot of natural burials on people's properties, because out in Boring there's just large acreage, and so she's a good person to also ask in terms of green burials on private property. Now, in Oregon, I'm going to be talking about conservation burial grounds, different than your traditional cemetery. This is down actually in Ashland, kind of down by you. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called the Forest. It's a conservation burial ground, and it's a natural burial ground. So I'm wanting to take a field trip down there, and again, it's all natural burial. It's all using shrouds, or everything has to be totally absorbed by the earth. And then this is just this is a brochure, and again, their mission statement is to provide a space to reconnect our experience of life and death with land's conservation. So it's called the Forest, and that's what they're all about. Looks like 18 acres. Now, prior to one in Oregon, Herland Forest up in Washington. I'm familiar with them. We've done a couple up there. Same thing. It's a conservation burial place, and you're just buried right there amongst the trees. So that's called Herland Forest. And then White Eagle Memorial Preserve is in White Eagle, Washington. It's just over the Oregon Washington border. And again, it's their whole idea of conservation and using a natural burial. They don't necessarily have headstones, they'll have rocks. They use location by GPS. So that's how you can find. Oh, and here's Elizabeth Fournier's book. It's called The Green Burial Guidebook. Anyway, it's got a lot of good information in it. Okay, any questions at this point? I see we're up to 14, but anything regarding green burials? Okay.
Oh, sorry. No, nothing for this topic.
Okay. All right. So this is probably the newest trend. It's called natural organic reduction, or NOR. So Washington State was the first state to pass legislation approving natural organic reduction. Oregon just approved it, and that would allow natural organic reduction in July 2022. So this is a company called Recompose, and those pods are the pods where people are placed. And another word for natural organic reduction is human composting. Maybe you've heard of it that way. We have another company called Return Home in Auburn. And again, it provides an end-of-life service that gently transforms human remains into rich, fertile soil. This is what they do. They have the same thing, about 75 of these pods, and the person is placed in this pod with a lot of natural hay, alfalfa, straw. Again, here's how this terramation works. For about 30 days, a body is placed in this unit, and then they pump oxygen through the vessel, and then that stimulates the microbes. And then after 30 days, so what they've done is they've just actually accelerated what would happen during a natural burial. Okay, so when you have a natural burial, the body is placed in the ground, and then the same microbe action takes place, but the terramation accelerates it. So then after 30 days, the soil is removed from one vessel to another. So after 60 days, you're actually able to get soil. You can take and you can plant in your garden. They tell me it can be like a pickup truck amount of soil. Now, if you don't want to use it, then they will donate it to a place where there's they'll use the soil for where it's been deforestation. So that's terramation or human composting. Any questions about human composting before I go?
Yeah, we had one question.
Yep.
What happens to the chemicals in the human body during terramation?
Chemicals, mean like if there was, you mean the carbon, you mean like chemotherapy, things like that?
We'll see if we get a response, but yeah, why don't you speak to that?
So there's enough organic matter to absorb most of those chemicals. Now, suffices to say that this is still a new process. So they haven't exactly tested the material before and after. But again, there's enough organic material along with the body that whatever chemicals should be dispersed at a fairly maximum level. Anyway, it's a good question to look into. All right. All right. What are we doing with time here? Okay. All right. So, going on to death doulas, also known as death midwives or dead midwifery. And so end-of-life doulas act as your guide along the end-of-life journey. I read the book, and I'll come up here in just a second here. Caring for the Dying. It's a dual approach to a meaningful death. So social worker in New York City Hospice, he realized that hospice didn't do enough to support families emotionally, which I'm sure you can relate to. And he discovered the birthing doula model could be applied to the end of life. So he wrote a book and he has a training. So I took this training about 4 years ago, because again, I really appreciated what he was saying. And so these are the guiding principles. Again, it's non-medical, so it complements hospice very, very well. It's non-judgmental support, family-centered, holistic care, empowerment. And then when I looked at your website, your transitions program is very much an end-of-life doula somewhat model. And anyone that would be interested in doing some end-of-life doula program, your transitions program, I think, is just a great place for them to be part of. I know that after my training, there's about 70 people when I did it about 3 years ago, that trained here in Oregon. And the whole idea is that, you get this training, book training, but then you actually have to go out and do it. And so we were meeting monthly up until March of 2020. And people want to know, where can you get my training? Where can I get some training? And I said, try volunteering with hospice, because it's a great place to actually be a support and then be part of that end of life. And as a matter of fact, my understanding is the National Hospice Organization actually created a committee to see how end-of-life doulas could be included in hospice care, and then be paid. The hospice would be paid by Medicare. Now, we all know that Medicare is getting less payment than more. So hopefully this can be achieved. But like I said, when I looked at your website, I thought your transitions program, I thought it was a great program, very much in line with end-of-life doulas. Okay, couple of things that I wanted to just kind of help you understand. So there's this misconception that Medicare or Medicaid, Social Security, or the VA will pay for funeral expenses. So none of these agencies will pay for funeral or cremation. They will pay only when the person is alive. After death, and it's up to the family. The VA will reimburse final expenses if the veteran is disabled through military service. But the key word here is reimburse. Families have to pay up front for either the cremation or the burial, and then the VA will reimburse. So what are the benefits through the VA? Well, they're strictly burial benefits. For the veteran, it's a committal service with military honors, which includes TAPS, the folding and presenting of flag. Here in Portland, Willamette National used to have rifle volley, but they're short on funds, so they don't have that. But Milwaukee American Legion actually will provide rifle volley for families, and it includes either the grave space if it's casketed, or cremated remains. It can either be in the ground, or on the right here you see in a columbarium. And it also applies to the spouse, and also if a child is developmentally disabled prior to the age of 18, then when the funeral home calls, they need to make sure that the cemetery knows that there's a possibility of three grave spaces, or three people to be using that. So that's the burial benefit. I know you've got a couple of cemeteries down your way. Okay, so I wanted to kind of talk about organ donation versus anatomical donation or body donation. A lot of people think that when you talk about organ donation, when they're on hospice, they can donate their organs. So it gets a little semantics here. So the organ donation, a person is usually in the hospital and they must be on life support in order to keep the organs viable for transplant. So on your driver's license, you say I'm an organ donor. So what happens when a person is declared legally dead and the decision to remove life support is made, then the hospital staff will actually approach the family about organ donation. We always have to, when we ever get a phone call and saying, my father's, they've decided that, he's brain dead, or if someone was in an accident, we're going to disconnect life support. We always have to warn them that the hospital now, their next question is do they want to be an organ donor? So, and the person must not have any communicable disease. So that's organ donation. Again, the person has to be on life support. Now, anatomical donation, and Eternitas Life, Medcure, BioGift, Science Care. So by donating your body to one of the anatomical donation companies, your body is disarticulated and distributed throughout the country for research. The body is then cremated at no cost to the family. So a lot of times social workers usually use this resource for families who have very limited funds. So, but what we always like to tell families is that what you need to be aware of is that even though you register, because you do have to register for any of these anatomical donation companies, at the time of death, they could be rejected for a variety of reasons. Either there's they're too heavy, there's too much edema, they've contracted a communicable disease. There's just a variety of reasons where they could be rejected. So it's really imperative that you have a backup funeral home is listed. Otherwise, we've had people that call us at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning trying to find a funeral home that will take care of their loved one because the anatomical donation company said, nope, sorry. All right, this is one of my favorites. This is one of my favorite trends. So living funerals or celebration of life prior to death. It comes from a book called Parting Ways. This is an excellent book. It's New Rituals and Celebrations of Life's Passing. The author was a journalist. And so she documented her mother's decline, her mother's end of life, because her father died in the hospital years before, and it was just a dreadful situation. And so she wanted to do something different for her mother. So this whole idea of a living funeral, and if anyone's read Tuesdays with Maury, you'll recognize that. It's like this, it's like a party. It's more of a party than a funeral because we don't call it a funeral. What it does is it allows the person to express their love and their appreciation for people left behind. And it's really a beautiful way of facilitating the grief process. And then what people can do is, this whole celebration of life can be recorded, and then later on at the memorial service, then you can play this. And so it's really quite an intimate thing. So again, I'm just really enamored with this whole idea of a living funeral. And the thing is, if a person's on hospice, and if they're, if you've got someone that's family's coming into town, maybe to celebrate a 90th birthday or something like that, you could be turning this into kind of a celebration of life, so that family members have kind of a legacy that they can focus on during the grief process. What I wanted to share with you, those last few slides, is this is the information necessary for a death certificate. A lot of times we'll get a call and the person doesn't have any family, and they're incoherent, they're in a coma. And so when we fill out the death certificate, we don't have much to go on. So if you're working with someone who doesn't have family or friends that can give this information, it's very helpful to the funeral home. If you can, get, obviously you'll have the date of birth, you'll have the social security number. You may not always get the parents' names or their highest education level, or even their occupation. You generally will know if they're a veteran. This helps the funeral home so much in terms of filling out the death certificate. I just don't like the fact that I have to put unknown in all of these deaths on these death certificates. Okay, let me just see it. And then the last one I wanted to talk about was, what if a person doesn't have any family members to carry out disposition? So this is a legal document and it's electronic. I can send it to you. What it does is it appoints either a neighbor or a friend, and the thing is, if people are not married and if they're not registered as a domestic partnership, when they die, when the partner dies, the other person is left out of the disposition because they are not considered the legal next of kin. And then, I mean, there's people that just have lived together for years, but the other person dies and they're not considered the legal next of kin. So this is a form that it really doesn't need to be notarized, just needs to be witnessed. We've done it with families where it was a granddaughter that was taking care of her grandfather, and she made all these arrangements. He wanted to be buried at Willamette National, and we carried out, he had the money. And then she said after it was all, after we did all this planning, that she was afraid that her mother, who was estranged from her grandfather, would come down from Alaska and decide that he would be cremated and that she would keep the money. So we went ahead and did this appointment of persons to make decisions. And when he died, it's exactly what happened, but the granddaughter was able to show this, and we as a funeral home had it, social workers had it. And what she said to me was that the last month of his life was the most peaceful for her because she knew everything was in place. So again, this is a good document to have. All right, I'm at the end. I wish I could send you provide refreshments, but consider this your virtual refreshments. We did a photo shoot. We took Harley D to Voodoo Donuts in Portland. And all right, now for questions.
Okay, we had a couple come up throughout that I.
Okay, and there's my contact information.
Okay, so one that kind of came up early on was, when you're discussing independently owned versus not funeral homes, is there a difference in the services that they're allowed to offer, or is it maybe more about, quality of service?
It can be both. What I know is that as the business owner, I can do a lot of things that the Dignity Memorial folks can. In other words, they don't have aqua cremation here. The corporation was not interested in aqua cremation, but we were. I know some wonderful funeral directors that went to school because they wanted to help people, and they then went to work for a corporate funeral home, and they were trained to be salespeople. So this whole idea of being sold something. So, again, and you may have wonderful experiences with corporate funeral homes, and maybe not good experience with independents. It really kind of depends on who you are. But what I know is that as an independent funeral home, we can do a lot more. We're less restricted in terms of what we can do, because it's all about us caring for the family and advocating. You're probably not going to get a Dignity Memorial or a corporate funeral home advocating for home funerals.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And just
sorry, I'm kind of opinionated in that respect.
Another question came up when we were discussing natural burials about, you know, we talked about chemicals or medication that may be in the body, but what about any kind of hardware that might be in the body?
So in the terramation, what happens is after that first month, what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to figure out, I want to, let's just see. All right. I want to be able to look at you. Okay, so here we go. All right. So after the first month, then anything that's in the person, like artificial, you know, knees or anything, they're actually removed from the terramation, from the composting, and then the bones are actually removed and they're ground, and then they're reintroduced into this composting material. So it actually is then removed, either through a magnet or some type of tool.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions. If there's any other questions coming up, please put them in the chat, or excuse me, like I said, we'll send the slides out. We'll send an email afterwards with all this information, links, and Deborah's contact information. And oh, here's a question that just came up. Is there a death cafe in Corvallis? And the answer is yes. We at Lumina actually offer a death cafe. And right now we're virtual. We've been virtual throughout the pandemic. Hopefully soon we'll be able to return to in-person. But that is something that we meet virtually once a month. And I will put that information as well in the email afterwards, or feel free to check out our website to get information about that. Okay, I think that is all for today. So thank you, Deborah. This has been really interesting. There's been a lot of thanks put in the chat as well.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And if questions come up, my email's there, phone number's there. Don't hesitate to call me.
Great, thank you. Okay, so next month, before I let you go, just want to say next month, our next Illuminating series is a 3-part. However, you can attend 1, you can attend 2, you can attend all 3. But we do have a 3-part series coming up about advanced care planning. And so next month, our topic is going to be on advanced care planning, how you start that conversation with your loved ones, not always easy to do. So we will be jumping into that next month. We'll put information about that in the email as well. And just a reminder, you know, if you cannot attend a live Illuminating series, you can always register, and then you'll get the recording and the slides afterwards. So feel free to do that as well. All right, thank you all for being here today. We'll let you go.
Okay, thanks, Halby. Well done. I really like your series.
Thanks, Deborah.
You're welcome. Bye-bye now.